Happy midday. Welcome to the Great Books mini lecture. And as always, before we start, I want to thank the CoLab staff, video productions, and marketing team for helping to make this happen. And thank you for coming out over the lunch hour. I'm Michael Carragher. I'm an assistant professor of English here at Johnson County, and with Maureen Fitzpatrick, we're coordinating the series this year. This is our first presentation this semester. We'll have two more, one in March and one in April. So please check your calendars and come back out. To begin, Ashley Vasquez is Associate Professor of Speech and Debate here at Johnson County. She holds a BA in Communication, Journalism, and Photojournalism from Park University, and an MA in Communication and Leadership, also from Park. After 7 years of adjunct teaching, she assumed full-time duties at the college 4 years ago. Prior to that, she was a reporter and later a managing editor for 8 years at two different community-centered local newspaper organizations. And I think those served Washington, Missouri, Smithville, Missouri, and St. Joseph. Aside from her duties here at the college, she enjoys spending time with her husband and her 8-year-old daughter, pursuing her writing goals as well. I first met Ashley about a year ago at our Master Teacher Workshop, and it was pretty obvious pretty quickly that her ability to communicate to an audience and to engage just was off the charts, and that her ability to teach was never in question. And as soon as I came back to campus, it was a matter of minutes before I started hearing fellow faculty and her students singing her praises. So that's always a good sign you're doing something right. And so when I fell into coordinating the series, Ashley was the first one I approached. And I knew then and I know today she's going to be able to walk us through a text and really help us understand how it's had an impact. Her choice is Blue Highways by William Least Heatmoon. It's a 1983 travelogue. It's one of my favorite books, and so I was very pleased when she chose it. If you've not read it, make sure you grab a copy. Hers is really weathered and tattered, but they sell newer ones, I think. So Ashley Vasquez.
I may need this sucker later. Thank you. That was too kind. As a public speaking teacher, you know, I was so honored to get to do this and started thinking about what I was going to say and started kind of bashing my head against the wall because I couldn't figure out how to get it into this pretty little package that we teach all the time. It should look just like this. And then I realized after hours of agonizing pain that this book doesn't do that, and so I'm not going to do that either. We're going to kind of take a journey for a little while and be very circular instead of linear, so I hope that you will go on that ride with me for a little while. Before I start, I want to tell a little story that crossed my mind recently. As Dr. Carriger said, I was a journalist for several years, and in that role, I did a lot of job duties that were kind of strange, from rewriting obituaries for years to covering the cow chip contest. Do you know what cow chip contest? It's exactly what you think it is. But recently I was sitting in a meeting and my mind was wandering, as it often does, somewhere else. And I thought of something I hadn't thought of in over a decade. I thought of a job duty I used to have. So when I worked for Smithville, we had something called the Big Buck Contest. So every year during deer season, I had to be there at the office at 6 a.m. And outside the office would be truck after truck after truck of these kind of interesting, often older men, sometimes men with their children, sometimes women, with their deer carcasses from the weekend. And I had to learn how to count points, and I'd go out there with my camera, and we'd sit around and talk and take their picture with their dead deer. And at 25 years old, that was miserable. Like, that was not what I wanted to do at 6 a.m. But the funny part is, when I was sitting in this meeting, drifting off, I thought to myself, I'd rather be hanging out with dead deer than sit through another minute of this meeting. Like, I would rather be doing these kinds of things than sit here. And I giggled out loud and felt really embarrassed, because then people are looking at me like, why is she laughing at herself at an inappropriate moment? But the thing that I think is sort of special about that is, my original thought was, what is wrong with me? There has to be something wrong with someone who would say that. But I think what's wrong with me is what William Least Heatmoon made wrong with me, and the way that I kind of see the world and things that this book does for me. So I was a junior in college, I might have been a sophomore, when I took feature writing class in journalism, and the professor's textbook was this book. So we were learning long-form feature writing. What was interesting about it was it's not really that, it is that kind of book, but it's not a textbook at all, and I just loved it. So my goal today is to tell you a little bit about the book, the history, the kind of setup of it. I also want to tell you about the people, and because those are who are really special to me, and then kind of the themes that I see today that I didn't see, I think, at 19, which some were even a little disturbing. A reread was very eye-opening. It's kind of an interesting book in that way. So I guess I'll start with, that's my old business card, anyway. Found that sucker, I was really proud of it. I was really proud when I was a 21-year-old journalist. It meant a lot. The preface of the book reads, "On the old highway maps of America, the main routes were red and the back roads blue. Now even the colors are changing. But in those brevities, just before dawn and a little after dusk, times neither day or night, the old roads return to the sky some of its color. Then, in truth, they carry a mysterious cast of blue, and it's that time when they pull off the blue highway is the strongest, when the open road is a beckoning, a strangeness, a place where a man can lose himself." So the author is William Lease Teat Moon. He was born in Kansas City, Missouri, from our area. He attended University of Missouri for all of his degrees. He was actually a professor at MU when he decided to start writing this book. He's of Osage and European ancestry, which is a major theme in the book, is his Native American background. One of the reasons he starts the book is because he's separated from his wife. He's 38 years old, and he loses his job. Sort of has nothing and doesn't know what he's gonna do. So he makes this choice to take his 1975 Econoline van that he's sort of outfitted and made super light, puts a bed in it, handful of things, very little money, and he's gonna take a 13,000-mile journey across America. And it took him over 3 months. This is the actual journey. There's a lot of really big fans that take the journey every year. I have not, and I do have a reason for that I can tell you later about. And so he starts in Columbia, Missouri, and works his way all the way around through the months and then back home. Just off the get-go, it's kind of interesting to think about what little he had. Right? He had a camping stove. He eats a lot of chopped liver, really. I mean, just really strange food. He also has a copy of Leaves of Grass and Black Elks, or Black Elk Speaks, which I don't know, just says a lot about who he was, I think, in a lot of ways. He calls his impending divorce the Indian Wars because his wife was Cherokee, and throughout the book he's working through that. There are really three main characters to this book that I see. It is the author's journey, so it is nonfiction mostly. So much about him and where he is in Columbia, the midst of this separation, to where he ends up when he gets back to Columbia. It's also the environment. He is very focused on writing about where he is and what the land looks like and what the people are like there in that land. And then, of course, the people. And that's what I'm super drawn to and why we learned it in journalism classes, was how he writes about these particular folks that he finds in these places that we don't go. So if you don't know what blue highways actually means, it is the back roads. He has a real disdain for the interstate. And there's a couple of places where he ends up ending up on the interstate. There's nowhere else to go, and he writes about how much he just hates these people and their fat children, and he just hates it. And so he's going to all of these places you wouldn't expect any one of us to want to drive off into. So I want to talk a little bit about his writing style. It is what we consider observational long-form journalism. So he's taking notes, he's writing it as though he's writing a piece, but then he's inserting so much of his own experience within it because it's autobiographical and self-reflective. What he doesn't do that's really interesting and fits more in the journalism style is he doesn't offer much interpretation. It's very much what is in front of him. What do you see? What do they say exactly? And leaves the reader to try to figure out what that means to them. And I think that's why this book changes for me over time, because I interpret the meaning so much differently without him having to tell me what it means. And it's very highly conversational. It's a lot of the back and forth and easy versus what we consider a real formal interview. It is in true to said quotation style, and this can be somewhat controversial, and I have mixed feelings about this approach. So what he does differently than what we would ever do probably in normal journalism is put in inflection, right? Write in the way that someone speaks, because most of the time it feels it can be leaving or lacking dignity to that person. he tries to do it, I think, in a way that still is dignified, but then captures who they are. I have a couple examples that I like. This is Bill Hammond in Kentucky, one of the first few people he meets. "That's our supper you're wanting, but I can heat you up one of them sandwiches in the microwave radio oven. Some time ago, they tested a gun over there. Soldier, use it, that's how it's spelled, in Vietnam? I heard so, but years before it was a gas station and diner. Even had slot machines in the back. The cave's seen it all." This is my favorite from a waitress in South Carolina. He was asking about, like, does his meal come with grits? And she said, "It does if you asked for it," which is such a great way of interpreting language that we don't typically do. When I was a journalist, the general rule was, if you're an elected official or someone in power and you say something wrong too darn bad, we're gonna print it the way you said it. But if you're like the average Joe, clean it up, do the best you can to give people kind of respect. And sometimes it does take away from that person and who they really are, and I think that's something he does really, really well. Again, there are low levels of interpretation. He does a really good job showing an environment and what's happening and letting you figure it out. This is one of my favorites. "A person shows himself in the way he opens an orange. Some tear jaggedly with fingers, some slice with a thumbnail, some spiral latitudinally, while others go on the longitude. That man pulled out a pocket knife and precisely quartered the skin stem to navel, so the fruit came out in sections. When he finished cutting, the peel, still attached to the base, lay on the pier like an open blossom." So what kind of person cuts an orange like that? What does that say about them? When I taught reporting classes, I did an activity that I'm revamping because I read the book again. And I'd kind of forgotten I did it. And I think Dina, she's gonna let me do this. But I used to take my students into other professors' offices with nothing super private out and say, you have 3 minutes, write down everything you see that you think matters. Then come back and let's see what we know about this person. We're gonna do this in interpersonal with a colleague's office to see if we can figure out what kind of job do they have? Do they have a family? Are they married? Is it even a male or a female? Who is this person based on the things that are around them? Without telling us, and I think that's really cool that he does this. So there's some other connecting storylines that make the whole piece work, and one is food. He really loves talking about food, even when he's eating terrible chopped liver. But this thing is just a fun thing, but he has a calendar scale on how good a diner is gonna be. So if it has no calendar, it's the same as an interstate pit stop. Crappy place to eat. 1 calendar is pre-processed food assembled in New Jersey. 2 calendars, if only go there if fish trophies are present, then it's gonna be okay. 3 calendars, can't miss on the farm boy breakfast. 4 calendars, try the homemade pie too, spelled that way. And 5 calendars, keep it under your hat or they'll franchise. And so throughout the book, when he's in these places, because where are you gonna go talk to people but taverns and restaurants? He goes, it's a 2 calendar place, it's a 3 calendar place, it's a no calendar place. Whoa, 2 questions, okay. And then the other kind of connecting thing that he does is he puts headlines in, which I always really loved this aspect. So he tells you all these observations, but when he's maybe uncomfortable or something's going on that needs some level of comedic relief, he'll put these great like little headlines in. His is Yankee half-breed knifed, because he was in a situation that he was concerned someone was going to kill him. So all of these things kind of come together, and it's done in a very chronological spatial order. So we start out in Columbia, and we just start to meet some people, and we go and go and go and go till we're done. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was some of the people. And these are the people that stood out to me. These pictures are straight out of the book, which I think is great too. Like, you can write main characters, but you can't write people. And it does make me a little sad when I think too hard about it, because it's 40 years old, so all these people are dead. I mean, they're gone. And you wonder like where their story went. Kind of want to see where they are, but or what happened to them. But Madison Wheeler is one of my favorites. So I want to tell you a little bit about him. He's from a town called Nameless, Tennessee, which is one of the reasons he goes to a lot of the places he goes to, is he finds the unique names that he thinks are strange. He's like, well, what happens in Liberty Bond? What is a place like that? Or how did Nameless get named? And find out Nameless actually gets named because the townspeople, well, the post office said it had to have a name, and they couldn't agree on a name, and so they ended up with Nameless. So if you ever go to Nameless, Tennessee. He writes, the whole time my rig sat in the middle of the right lane while we stood talking next to it and wiped at the mist. No one else came or went. Wheeler said, factory works easier on the back, and I don't mind it, understand, but a man becomes what he does. Gotta watch that. That's why I keep at farmin', although the crops haven't ever throve. It's the doin' that's important. He looked up suddenly. My apologies, I didn't ask what you do that gets you to these hollers. I told him I'd been gone 6 days, but my account of the trip had already taken some polish. He nodded. Satisfaction is doing something important to yourself. A man ought to honor other people, but he's got to honor what he believes in too. I started the engine. Wheeler said, if you get back at it this way, stop in and see me. Always got beans and taters and a little piece of meat. Down along the ridge, I wondered why it's always those who live on little who are the ones to ask you to dinner. Which I just think is amazing, right? These are the kind of people that are real people. And it's one of the few things, well, it's one of the many things that I love about community college teaching, because I feel like we have the chance to spend a little bit more time with real people, with a little bit different, richer stories, and you never know what they're gonna be. Brother Patrick Duffy. So he's traveled through the Carolinas and come back around, and he ends up in Georgia, and he stumbles on a Trappist monastery in the middle of nowhere, Georgia, and starts talking to him about kind of, why are you here? Of all places, how did you get here? And this man used to be a New York City cop and decided that it was time to not be anymore and to see different things. And he talks a lot about his celibacy and what that means to him to be celibate. But there's a little piece of it that I like quite a bit. Duffy says, I began with this broken truth that I am. I start from the entire broken man, entire but whole. When I work to become empty and whole, in looking for ways to God, I find parts of myself coming together. In that union, I find a regeneration. And Lee's Teat Moon says, sounds like a spiritual biology. He says, why not? Coming here is following a call to be quiet. When I go quiet, I stop hearing myself and I start hearing the world outside me. Then I hear something very great. It's one of the few moments in the book where he's positive about religion. He's very critical of the Baptist churches and the poor names that they use. And he picks up a Seventh-day Adventist out near Montana way later in the book that he becomes friendly with, but there is this kind of critique of traditional Christianity along colonialism, which we'll get to in a little bit. But I always liked Patrick Duffy. I wish I had known him. The next is probably the most jarring part of the book for me and makes me uncomfortable, and I may make you slightly uncomfortable for a few minutes, but it's kind of the intent. So he travels to Selma, Alabama, and this is 14 years after the Selma civil rights protests, and goes and starts talking to people, and he does a really nice job of juxtaposing racists against black people, if we're gonna be really honest. So this is James and Charles. Ray doesn't get a picture in Mickey's bar. I don't think Ray deserves a picture, but Ray does have something important to say. Now I am gonna replace some of the language with language I'm comfortable saying, so I'll use the word they. So Heat Moon's in this bar, and the waitress is talking to him, and the only question he is asking is, how's it changed around here? What's different? And he gets real kind of aggressive Ray coming at him. Ray wants to talk. Ray wants to tell him what's going on. It says, Ray, a jagged man, sat down beside me and looked hard at the woman. He said, how's it his concern? Still talking to her, he turned to me, and in my face opened a smile like a jackknife. All these northern boys want to know is, how's your problem? They don't think we get sick of that? Won't they let us rest? Ain't they got nothing new to say? Okay, Sonny Jim, I'll tell you about change. Kind of came as a threat. Goes on and he says, Lee Seat Moon says, would anybody stop a black man if he wanted a drink in here? I'll go to hell. I've been all through this and I'm sick of it. He turned away and talked to Bernita. Can't figure what you're getting at. He says, just want to see how things are. All I know is from books or TV. There it is. That whole march was a TV stunt. They knew what would happen there. That's why they came. Hardly none of them lived here. They knew the sheriff had question of himself of reputation. They picked him, not the town. Well, they got what they were looking for, and I'm sick of going over it and over it. I don't like Ray. Ray says a lot of horrible, horrible things that makes me wildly uncomfortable. But what I will say about Ray that I think is important is his critique of the media. I believe in the community journalism model. I will always believe in that model. I didn't not work at the New York Times because I didn't want to, or I didn't try that path. I believed in being in the communities that you're serving, having dignity, having integrity, being able to stay to your word, and something that happens in major events that isn't intended or unintended consequence. Something big happens. Everyone comes flooding in, they sort of blow up the town, and then they leave. And the wounds are still there. People are still trying to figure out how to heal. I'm not, into the fake news movement or whatever, but there is something almost abusive about a media that does that. And I think that is what he's commenting on, is Selma. They came in here, destroyed our town, made us national news, and they just left. When I was a journalist, I used to see this a lot, even from like Kansas City news or St. Louis news. There'd be some drama, something at the school. All the news stations would run in, they might quote right, they might not, and they leave, and then everyone's upset, they're hurt, they're mad at each other, and they would rely on the community newspaper to try to pick up those pieces. And so I immediately, when I read this again, I thought of Charlottesville. Like, what's happening there now? We don't hear about it. They're trying to pick up those pieces, and that seems, I think Ray is saying something. It's just maybe not everything he's saying is something I would like. He goes on, Ray owns a car dealership, and he says, I employ those people. They wash my cars, and I love, Heat Moon says, well, would you let them sell a car? He says, oh no one would ever buy a car again. So I think, and this is just 14 years after the civil rights movement. I was talking to a colleague about this. Do I think it's any different today? I don't know. I mean, we all can be super hopeful that someone would get hired, but I don't know. What I love about James and Charles is then he immediately goes to Sylvan Street, which is basically the projects of Selma, and talks to them about the same kind of subjects. He says, I stood up on the van. He says, I'm trying to find out if things have changed since the march. James says, I'll tell you in 3 words, ain't nothing changed. Let me ask another question. Could you get a drink at Mickey's tonight? He says, go ask me if I want in there, because I'll tell you, they don't gotta keep this man out because he don't want in. I hear you, but could you? The minute I do, it's membership time. I just went in and nobody said anything about my membership. Several teenagers gathered. I was the wrong color in the wrong street, but no one said anything. The man talking to me was James Walker, born and raised in Selma Project, and just discharged from 4 years in the Air Force. It's been almost 10 years to the day since King got shot, he said. And the movement's been dead that long. Things slipping. Black man losing ground again. My mama's afraid to talk to a white, and my grandmama don't care. She just worries about the kids. And then later, the police come by and keep checking him. And that's an interesting theme too. He keeps having a lot of police run-ins in the South, and not of them necessarily that bad, but a lot of knocking on the windows and should you be here? Are you allowed to be here? Which is an interesting perspective and how that might be different today or for you or for me. The next is Barbara St. Pierre from Martinsville, Louisiana. She's really cool. Like, I just want to hang out. She says, I'll tell you something that took me a long time to figure out, but I know how to end race problems. Find a way to make people get bored with hating instead of helping. Simple. That's what it boils down to. So she's a single mother, trying to go to school, but there's a piece of this interaction that I really, really adore, because I think it took a lot of courage on the part of Heat Moon. Because what he does is he admits his own bias in writing. So she's talking about a situation that happened to her where she had gotten essentially hooked on pills. She'd been given speed for diet, so she didn't realize she was hooked. Tried to check into a facility, and they made her sign away her rights, and she says, you know how hard it is to get adjudicated around here? And he says to her, adjudicated? She goes, what? You didn't think I knew the word, or is it not the right word? Which I thought was really interesting, because the author took the time to say he didn't think that she could have language skills at that level when she did, and that she could call him out for it. And as writers, I think it's really hard. Well, I think we see this in books where they sugarcoat everything and they make themselves, especially in a nonfiction perspective, look good, right? I'm awesome. I'm this woke person, and he's willing to show his own pitfalls. I'll come back, I promise. Kendrick Fritz is another one of my favorites near Cedar City, Utah. He's on a Hopi reservation, which is and there's so many great Native American stories and connections historically there. And he had quite a few things to say that I really liked as well. He says, I can't speak for Navajos about prejudice, but I know about Hopis who believe we survived Spaniards, missionaries, 1,000 years of Indians, and even the BIA. But Taurus, he smiled, smallpox would be better. It's this kind of idea that, I think we see this in here, that people being real tourists of other cultures and going around and visiting them and not really respecting, who they are. And I like this passage too. He talks about religion. Heatmoon says, the religion doesn't seem to have much of an ethical code. And Kendrick says, it's there. We watch what the Kachinas say and do, but the spider grandmother did give 2 rules to all men, not just Hopis. If you look at them, they cover everything, she said. Don't go around hurting each other, and she said, try to understand things. He says, I like them very much. Kendrick says, our religion keeps reminding us that we aren't just will and thoughts. We're also sand and wind and thunder. Rain, the seasons, all those things. You learn to respect everything because you are everything. If you respect yourself and respect all things, that's why we have so many songs of creation to remind us where we came from. And the 4th world forgets that. We'll disappear in the wilderness like the 3rd world, where people decided they had created themselves. I just like that he connects so much to his own heritage, and I get kind of emotional when I think about those things, because as he travels to certain parts of the country, I feel myself connecting as well. Don't know much about me. My parents moved around a lot when I was a kid, and they were sort of vagabonds on their own. They loved 70s rock music and decided to get the heck out of Southwest Missouri. And we lived in Washington State for several years of my childhood outside Portland, and he takes a journey through that area as well and talks about a paper mill. Has anyone ever smelled a paper mill? When my parents moved, they didn't know what that meant to be downwind from a paper mill. And so they had to find a rental home and get a rental home, and we're right there on the Columbia River, and it smells like rotten eggs and garbage every day, all day. And they had signed this lease for like 3 months until they could find another house, and to see him connect so well to the earth and these kinds of experiences, and then find myself connecting to them too and going, oh, that's so true. Like, I want to go. Now I almost miss the smell. It's kind of like the deer. I don't know. You kind of miss it. Okay. And then we have Margaret and Lori Shaylander. They're a mother and daughter owners of a gas station and diner in Frenchman, Nevada. It's on a bombing range. So it's like there's real U.S. bombs going off, and like nobody lives there. And they're 100 miles from anything that can ever help them, like a hospital. And he stops there and asks, like, what are you 2 ladies doing here? What's the point of all this? And their responses are kind of fun. Margaret says, we were living here when my husband died, but I've never wanted to move. Strange how this godforsaken place gets in you. In the summer, it's 110. In the winter, it's 15 below. Telephone lines get blown down regularly, or they did before the microwave relay came in. When the lines went down, we were cut off. But you get to know yourself out here. You have to. And you get to know the others around because we all have to look at each other. Out here, sooner or later, all of us need help. We look out for yourself, look out for each other. It's the law of the land. She talks about how she wanted to have her daughter in Frenchman. She wanted to have her on the pool table. So interesting, because this is real people said this stuff. She says, Callie, our daughter, is a 4th generation Nevadian. That's something in a state where most people are from somewhere else. I wanted to have a baby on the pool table, but nobody would listen. So we had to make the 90-mile-an-hour drive to Reno at 3 in the morning. God, what a ride. He says, on the pool table? She says, I don't think anyone's ever been born in Frenchman in 135 years. On a pool table in a bombing range? She said, it would have been something for her to remember. But you know what, sometimes even think about that. Like, some of these places, no one's been born there in 100 years because there's no hospital, there's no health care, there's no reason to keep coming back to these places that a lot of people used to call home. I also like this package, this little part a lot for myself, but because I had my first managing editor said this, and I think it's cool that it's a real thing. Missourians sometimes speak of a place called Hacklebarney, a non-existent town you try to get to that is forever just around the next curve or just over the next hill, a town you believe in but never get to. Maybe that's enlightenment, always a little ahead of perception. I think he's been looking for Hacklebarney the entire time and actually probably never finds it. And the last person I want to talk about, we've talked about a few themes, is Scott Chisholm near New York, near Cheshire, New York. He actually knew Scott from another interaction, and they don't have really deep conversations, which is kind of an interesting change. What he does with him is they build a wall. They go down to this river and they keep picking up big rock after big rock and kind of flexing their masculinity and who can pick up a bigger rock and submitting to his masculinity because it's his wall, and they build this beautiful wall and they work. And he talks a lot about the power of using your hands. And this is a section that maybe didn't click with me the first time I'd read it. So when I was in journalism school, I was in school with a lot of young men who loved Fight Club and On the Road. And they really liked this, and I never got it. And I think later in life I kind of see it, that somewhere in the new maker generation, we've come from a place where we stopped doing what our fathers did. We don't know how to fix cars. I don't know how to bake anything or sew, and that there is something to the manual and being able to do it. And I think it's just a real special event in several days he spends with Scott building. In Dime Box, Texas, a woman in a diner said to him, city people don't think anything important happens in a place like Dime Box, and usually it doesn't, unless you call conflict important, or love, or babies, or dying. And that's one of my other favorite quotes. So there are some themes that I want to kind of just talk about for a few minutes before we have questions and think about wrapping up. There's tons of culture, and a lot of the culture is tied to the land. But he has a lot of comments on what poverty is and whether we think poverty bad, right? Who decided that these people are destitute, other than city people? I think nothing happens there. He writes, their houses shrank and their colors changed from white to pastels to iridescence to no paint at all. The lawns went from vertigreen blue grass to tin fescue to hard-packed dirt glinting with fragments of glass, and the lawn ornaments changed from bird baths to plastic flamingos to donkeys to broken down automobiles with raised hoods like tombstones. On the porches stood long-legged ringer washers and ruined sofas, and by the front doors, wash tubs hung like coat of arms. I think one of the reasons, again, I connect to this book has a lot to do with my background. When my parents worked really hard to get out of Southwest Missouri, we became observers of our own families. I was far from it. So we go visit, and I would see these things. My grandma lived in a town called Stott City. It's like basically non-existent. And her porch was full. Like if there was a Hoarders episode, she could have been on it. She was a child of the Depression, so they'd go to the auctions and they would buy stuff. And so she would have like crates and crates of the orange peanuts that you eat, the circus peanuts, or sticky buns, and they would be like 2 years old. But that was how they lived. And so I was really accustomed to thinking about these things, but also never feeling like I was a part of it, right? Because I was the rich one. I mean, we weren't rich, but we just got the heck out. But I also would find myself offended in this other suburban world about the way that those people were treated and talked about. I talk about some of my family with my colleagues, but they're a little like Ray, if we're going to get real. And I have to make choices on whether I'm going to love that person and honor that person and give that person dignity, or if I'm going to, chastise them on Facebook. Usually I just block them so I don't have to see it. It usually fixes it. Some of the things he does in this book that are really sort of amazing is he does bring a new non-white perspective to the American journey. All of the books prior to this that I know of were written from the white male perspective. They're very much, let's go get on the highway and go find ourselves. And this is just a little different than that because he's showing you what he's experiencing as a non-white male, but also not going to the places that are easy, right? The interstate stops are easy. These places aren't. Nameless Tennessee is not easy. He really kind of sort of beginning of this idea of this ecocentrism, that our connection to the land changes who we are. Maybe even at a cellular level, I tend to believe pretty hard in this, that I have a sense of pride and connection to pieces of land that I'm a part of. And he definitely talks from his Native American background how important that is. There's part of this book I don't like. And I like it less now than I did when I was 19. And it was kind of a sad thing when I reread it, and I'm not sure who changed. I changed for sure. But did culture change with me? He is not as kind to women as he could be. He's really not. Some of that could be a symptom of what he's going through, right? He's going through this divorce and he's in this place. But there's dozens of female characters that he crosses that he does not stop to interview, and he almost always describes them by their body types. Never noticed that 20 years ago. And it made me, when I'm seeing it, almost angry, like, why did I pick this book? I still love this book, but now I hate him. Why is he doing this? It's so frustrating, especially, say, obese women, or if they were naggy. A lot of the things that I think just really are missed opportunities for him. He didn't take the time to go, well, I talked to your husband, now why don't I talk to you and see who you really are? And so that kind of always bummed me out. There's another part of this book that always made me mad, and still makes me mad, is that I was always jealous of this book. I was jealous of him. So I was in school with these guys who loved this book, and I don't know if I could pinpoint it then, but I think I definitely felt it, and I understand it now, is that I couldn't do that. That it wouldn't be appropriate for my gender. My poor mother would just die because I didn't have a cell phone, and I don't know that I could get those people to talk to me the way they talk to him. And I discovered that as a journalist, that it was hard. I had to sacrifice a lot of pieces of myself to get people to talk to me. But even in line with those deer hunters, I'm sure Heat Moon had a different discussion with them. And that always frustrated me that I couldn't be that person. No matter how hard I worked, I wasn't gonna be that deep. But just like the missed opportunities, I think another book or someone else with a female perspective would be really useful to find out what women, besides the very few he talked to, feel living here and thriving here. Closing thoughts, I guess, of what I think of it, then we can take some questions. The overall impact of this book, I think, the biggest one, is that it taught me to give dignity to other people, especially subjects that you are, in some ways, thrusting into the limelight. And I still carry this with my students and with my colleagues, that the way you treat someone else matters. And unlike the national media or even your local bigger media, I couldn't run into town and leave. That if I treated someone poorly, then I had to face them the next day. And that didn't feel very good if you did badly. And then the other thing I think I took from him that helped me be successful was to let other people have the last word sometimes. That was always a golden rule in the business. The reader gets the last word. So if you call me an ugly name, I print that, which I did lots. All the time. People said horrible things about me, and I'd write them. It felt great. And then you said, okay, because sometimes other voices are more important to you, especially voices that don't have the power you have. I had the power of the publication, so I owed them the last word. And I feel like Lee Heat-Moon does a really good job of doing that as well. He doesn't rip Ray to shreds. He tells you what Ray had to say, and lets you make those conclusions. And I think that there's a lot of care that's taken to do that. And I hope if you have a chance to read it, that you do. And maybe I'm excited and I appreciate the opportunity because I think it means so much different to me now that I'm the age he was when he traveled. And I'm curious to what it might mean to me at 45 or 55 or 65. I may see a whole nother story that I can't even see today. So thank you. Oh. Questions, thoughts? Anyone want to talk about it?
mentioned his Native American background, and I probably read this 30 years ago.
Yeah.
It's been a while, but I remember reading something 10 or 15 years ago about that he actually took the pen name William Lee C. Boone as a Boy Scout name. His father was the scoutmaster, and he was Heat Boone, and then his older brother was Little Heat Boone.
Yeah.
And then he took
Lesser Heat Moon was his brother.
Okay, and then he became Least Heat Boone.
Sure.
He was the youngest brother.
I'd never read it was anything about a Boy Scout name other than his name. I'd never heard that. So I don't know.
Are you talking about like the tribal myths?
Tribal myths,
Yeah, because he lived in Missouri. And
Really?
Spiral Boy Scout.
Because now he's known for taking pseudonyms because when he wrote Prairie Earth, which is kind of famous for the Kansas perspective. But he also wrote another book about the river, and I forget the name. But he traveled the Missouri River in a boat, and actually came on the campus of Park and didn't know that the person he was introducing himself to was teaching out of his book, and he was using a different name. So I had never heard that wasn't his given name. That would be interesting to. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm thankfully
Mhm. Interesting. He says he says that it's his name, so I don't know. Any questions?
I remember when I first read it that I kept waiting for him to have that sort of big philosophical moment. And you mentioned this at the end, is that he gives those deeper insights to the people. And you also told us what you got out of the book. At the end of the journey, what do you think he takes from it? Where does he end?
Because in the book, that's why it's so hard to talk about in a very linear, like, plot perspective, because it doesn't really end in this like perfect little package. I mean, he doesn't even tell us. He doesn't even tell us whether he got divorced. You just know he goes back to Columbia, and you just have no idea whatever happens within the four walls of the text. I do know his entire journey from North Dakota through Michigan is pretty awful. He's miserable the whole time. He pretty much hates everybody he meets, and he's covered in mosquito bites, and he's miserable. But then he writes in that portion about you don't know that it's the bad times. It's these nasty times that sometimes make you proud of who you are, or you don't know how happy you'll be after you've healed from the mosquito bites. So I mean, I think he grew as a person. He's definitely in the beginning whinier. Oh, that's another thing. Okay, that I didn't notice at 19. I thought he was very philosophical, and I still think he's very philosophical. But I find him more whiny. And maybe it's because I'm almost 38, and I'm like, shut up, like, get over it. Pull your pants up. Go to work. Deal with it. Get over it. I still love the people the same way I always did, but he gets less as he travels. I think a little less self-loathing, which it's hard to be when you see these kind of people in front of you. And that was something I experienced too. In the community journalism model, you spent time with people in ways that you wouldn't. For example, I covered, this makes me sad to talk about, I covered 14 child deaths in 8 years. I kind of got on the beat, and I developed a skill for doing it well, and so then I kept getting assigned it because I could do it. And I knew how to do it and to make people feel okay. And those kinds of moments moments you didn't know you had to experience, change the way that then you deal with people later on. You know, you asked me today, did you want to do? No, that's terrible. I don't want to do that. But I'm so glad that I did. So glad that I did.
So you write the companion piece to this as a woman. Do I need this? Do I need this companion piece as a woman? Now I got to speak quieter. What would be your map across the United
Ooh,
States? Where
that's
would
such a good
you
question.
go and talk?
I don't know if I'd go the exact same places. I think because it would make me sad, right? Because I sort of want to believe that, like, Bill Hammond is still there and Madison Wheeler is still there and everything's exactly the way the book is. And I think I would be depressed to see where it is. But I would definitely go through the South. I think he missed an opportunity when he went from Columbia through Illinois instead of going through the Ozarks, because my family's straight up Ozarks. And I think I would definitely go that direction, but I loved the journey through the South. When he went through Nevada, I wish he had seen more of California. I think there's something to see, not all the way to the coast, but that central Sacramento route that definitely doesn't get. I mean, California wants to be 2 states for a reason, and we don't hear from those people very often. And I would go through like Salem and some of the more interior of Massachusetts.
So you need to write the book.
Sure. Get right on that. It'd be a fun trip though. Well, I think some of it too. My parents love to do stuff like this. They took, we'd come back to Missouri to visit family, and they would road trip it. And so we did a lot of these destinations through Missoula and Jackson Hole, and I remember sitting in the back of the car and seeing a lot of the places, which may be why another reason I super connected to it is because I have this I remember what the Texas sky looks like. I remember, and maybe why I don't like the last part of the book that much is because we didn't travel that part of the country much.
So was the route improvised?
Oh yes, all the time.
So in other words, he came to a fork in the road and decided to go up to it.
Yeah, so he just had a Rand McNally atlas. That's like a real map. It's not your phone. And he would see like names on the map. There was one, yeah, and he would always go find out what the story that was. So like Liberty Bond, I always remember. Where's Liberty? I want to say Idaho. I don't know. It's in that corner of the book. And he gets there like, oh no, they like bombed that out, burnt it out. It's been gone for. I can't believe it's still on the map. And in so many of those towns, the dot cities, these backwoods. There's a town in Missouri called Raider, Missouri, which is where my family was all from before they moved away, and they had open air canneries where they canned tomatoes. But then the FDA came along, and you couldn't have open air canneries, and they all left. And I would stop at Raider too and see if I got any old relatives hanging out. Rita, how are you?
I just curiosity about like what would be somebody replicating this journey today with all the technology we have, all the ratings and media. And do you think the outcome will be better or no?
No. And see, he still took a map. I mean, because you can make the case in '78 he was using every single bit of technology available to him, right? It just wasn't anything else. There's lots of people who do this trip. It's kind of a thing. You can find websites where people like, they take the Blue Highways tour. That's their summer vacation. It won't be the same. How could it be the same? How could you be scared? I mean, he's sleeping in his van, and it's not creepy, which is even more funny that it's not creepy. Like at some point, we decided that's weird, right? My first publisher, his name is Mr. Miller, and he was a Korean War vet. He was not this big, very scary man. But he would hitchhike across Missouri and Kansas all the time in the 50s. Like, because then I got my new job, and the guy I was replacing, his name was Scooter Libby. No, it wasn't. Yeah, Scooter. No. What was his? That's Nixon's guy. Scooter was his first name. Sorry. I forgot his last name.
Wow.
Scooter Barry. Or something very similar. Remind me of Scooter Libby. Anyway, he had then two newspapermen. They would just hitchhike across the state, and it was just like not a thing. And can you imagine going out right now and being like, "Come on, let's go"? Like, can you imagine me without a phone? I might panic if that sucker's not in my hand. Maybe we should all do that. I don't know.
Plus, like, if you were to make this trip and write about it, would it be like as enough like heated, or would you like maybe like use the internet to your advantage and like keep that as a blogger or something?
Yeah, I think the formatting's changed. It's still long form, so I mean, I think you could get the same job done. It'd be kind of neat, almost in podcast style, like serial, and do it as you're experiencing it. Because some level of reflection may have changed the writing in some way. I think he did a good job of, again, not sugarcoating or whitewashing the reality of America.
Do you think that people would be as open and honest that you interviewed as his?
Yes, I do.
Even if it was just on the internet, you don't think they would?
I think, see, I've been asked, okay, quick side story, I know some people are going to want to go real quick. One of my job duties, and I think made me fearless, at my first job is I had to do what was called talk on the street. And so I had to go into like Cowan's restaurant or Drogi's Market, and I had to ask 10 people a very hard question. It was usually politically motivated or something from the local government, and they were very informed citizenry where I was. They loved their community newspaper. And that is not comfortable. 10 people every week strangers, hi, my name is Ashley Rader, I work for the Missourian. I'd like to ask you to talk on the street, are you willing? Like, over. I mean, you could ask 40 people before you get 10 to answer you, right? But those 10 were always amazing. So I think some people would probably say no, and they would not be into it. But if you got to that person who wanted to say something, it's like cracking open an orange or something. This awesome stuff would come out. We good? All right. Thanks, y'all.